The Galactic Imperium had cataloged 17,000 sentient species across the known universe, and in all that time, they had never once been wrong about a species' potential. Their predictive algorithms, refined over 60 million years of expansion, could analyze a civilization's technological trajectory with 99.8% accuracy. They knew which species would become threats, which would become vassals, and which would simply burn themselves out in nuclear fire or ecological collapse before achieving interstellar capability. Earth had been classified as the latter. High Arbiter Kethros reviewed the original survey data on his crystalline display, the holographic text casting pale blue light across his elongated features. The assessment had been conducted 300 of the local planet's orbital cycles ago, during what the indigenous population called their industrial revolution. The survey team had spent 40 rotations cataloging the species' biological parameters, social structures, and technological achievements before rendering their verdict. Homo sapiens, the report read. Classification: failed prototype. Species demonstrates high aggression index with minimal cooperative capacity. Technological development follows standard carbon-based sentient patterns, but is severely hampered by tribal factioning and resource competition. Predicted outcome: self-termination via environmental degradation or weapons of mass destruction within 200 local cycles. Recommendation: no intervention required. Mark for post-extinction resource harvesting. Kethros had read this report 1,000 times since the incident began, searching for some indication that the survey team had missed something, some flaw in their methodology that could explain how spectacularly wrong they had been. He found nothing. By every metric the Imperium used to evaluate emerging species, humanity should have destroyed itself generations ago. Instead, they had built the Achilles. Commander Daniel Harris stood on the bridge of the United Earth Defense Vessel Achilles, watching the tactical display with the kind of calm that came from having already accepted death. The ship around him was a testament to human stubbornness, a vessel that had been deemed impossible by every engineering team that had reviewed its specifications before finally being built anyway. "Status report," he said, his voice steady. Lieutenant Catherine Brooks looked up from her station, her dark eyes reflecting the red emergency lighting that had been their constant companion for the past 18 hours. Enemy fleet holding position at 1.3 light minutes. Count remains at 412 capital ships with an estimated 8,000 support vessels. They're charging weapons. Harris nodded slowly. 400 capital ships. Each one was roughly the size of Manhattan Island, bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust like an eggshell. Against them stood the Achilles, a single vessel that was, by comparison, barely larger than an aircraft carrier. The mathematics of the situation were not complex. "Time to reactor critical mass?" he asked. Chief Engineer Marcus Cole's voice crackled through the comm system from deep within the ship's engineering section. 7 minutes, maybe 8. The containment fields are holding, but barely. If we push any harder, we won't have time to aim. "That's fine," Harris said. "We won't need to aim." The story of how humanity reached this moment began not with first contact, but with the absence of it. For decades, human scientists had searched the cosmos for signs of intelligent life, pointing radio telescopes at distant stars and analyzing light spectrums for evidence of technological civilizations. They found nothing. The universe, it seemed, was empty. What they didn't know was that the universe was full, teeming with life and civilizations beyond counting. They simply weren't looking in the right frequencies, using the right methods, or understanding the right principles. The Galactic Imperium had observed their fumbling attempts with something between amusement and pity, the way a human might watch an ant trying to solve a calculus equation. First contact, when it finally came, was not the momentous occasion humanity had imagined. There were no diplomatic envoys, no messages of peace, no offers of technological exchange. Instead, there was simply a declaration, broadcast on every frequency humanity could receive, in every language they spoke. "Attention, indigenous population of Sol 3. This system has been claimed by the Galactic Imperium for resource extraction. You have one local rotation to vacate the planet. Failure to comply will result in termination. The message had arrived on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, the arguments had started. By Thursday, the riots had begun. By Friday, the first Imperium harvester ships had entered Earth's atmosphere, and by Saturday, 3 billion people were dead. The survivors did what humans had always done when faced with extinction. They fought back. Dr. Elizabeth Kane had been a theoretical physicist before the invasion, spending her days contemplating the mathematical elegance of string theory and the possibility of faster-than-light travel. After Saturday, she became something else entirely. She became the architect of humanity's salvation. Working in a bunker deep beneath the Swiss Alps, surrounded by the last functional supercomputers on Earth and a team of scientists who hadn't slept in weeks, Kane made a discovery that would change everything. The Imperium's technology, she realized, was based on fundamental misunderstandings of how the universe actually worked. Their ships used something the translation software called fold drives, technology that compressed space to allow faster-than-light travel. Their weapons manipulated gravitational fields and plasma containment. Their shields created barriers of hardened electromagnetic force. All of it was impressive, all of it was powerful, and all of it was built on assumptions that Kane realized were simply wrong. The Imperium had discovered physics the way most civilizations did, through slow, methodical experimentation and careful theory building. They had developed a model of the universe that worked, that explained the phenomena they observed, and that allowed them to build technology beyond anything humans had achieved. But they had never questioned whether their model was complete. Humans, Kane understood, approached science differently. Where other species built on certainty, humans thrived on doubt. Where other species accepted working models as truth, humans constantly searched for ways to break them. It was a trait that had hampered human development in some ways, leading to endless academic arguments and resources wasted on fringe theories. But it also meant that human physics had explored possibilities that the Imperium had never considered. In the years before the invasion, a small group of researchers had been working on something they called cascade resonance theory. The idea was simple in concept, but revolutionary in implication. What if the fundamental forces of the universe weren't actually fundamental? What if gravity, electromagnetism, and the nuclear forces were all manifestations of a single underlying phenomenon, one that could be manipulated directly if you knew how? The research had been dismissed by mainstream physics as crackpot speculation, unfunded and largely ignored. But Kane had read the papers, and in the desperate weeks after the invasion began, she realized something that made her blood run cold. The theory wasn't wrong, it was right. And if she could build a device that could trigger a cascade resonance event, it would make every weapon the Imperium possessed look like a child's toy. "You want to build what?" Admiral Patricia Nolan had asked when Kane presented her proposal to what remained of Earth's military leadership. "A cascade bomb," Kane had replied, pulling up holographic diagrams on the bunker's ancient projector. The device would create a localized reality cascade, a chain reaction that would propagate through space itself. Any matter within the affected radius would simply cease to exist, not destroyed, not converted to energy, just gone. "How big is the affected radius?" Kane had hesitated before answering. "Based on my calculation, somewhere between 10,000 and 50,000 kilometers. The math is uncertain." "And what happens to the ship carrying this device?" Kane didn't answer. She didn't need to. Admiral Nolan had stared at the diagrams for a long moment, her weathered face unreadable. She had lost 2 sons in the initial attack, along with her husband and everyone else she had ever known. She was not a woman prone to sentiment. "Build it," she said finally, "and build us a ship that can deliver it." The Achilles took 2 years to construct, built in secret beneath the ruins of what had once been Houston. The Imperium had largely ignored Earth after the initial harvest, leaving a small occupation force to oversee the remaining resource extraction, while the bulk of their fleet moved on to other conquests. They had been so certain of humanity's irrelevance that they never bothered to scan for underground construction. It was a mistake they would not live to regret. The ship itself was unlike anything humanity had built before. Its hull was constructed from a metamaterial that Kane's team had developed, a substance that existed partially outside normal space and was therefore invisible to Imperium sensors. Its drive system used the same cascade resonance principles as the bomb, allowing it to move in ways that conventional physics said were impossible. And at its heart sat the device that would either save humanity or destroy it. Commander Harris had been chosen to lead the mission not because he was the best pilot or the most experienced officer or even the most decorated veteran. He had been chosen because he was the only volunteer who had nothing left to lose. His wife, his children, his parents, everyone he had ever loved had died in the first wave of the attack. He had spent the 2 years since their death preparing himself for this moment. "Commander," Lieutenant Brooks said, pulling him from his memories, "the enemy fleet is beginning to move." Harris looked at the tactical display, watching the constellation of hostile contacts begin to shift. The Imperium had finally taken notice of them, recognizing the Achilles as something other than debris. He had hoped for a few more minutes of anonymity, but it didn't really matter. They were already inside the effective radius. "All hands," he said, his voice carrying through every compartment of the ship. "This is the commander. You all know why we're here. You all know what we're about to do. I won't insult you with speeches about duty or sacrifice. You've already given everything you have to give. I just want to say that it has been my honor to serve alongside you." He paused, looking around the bridge at the faces of his crew. Lieutenant Brooks at tactical, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. Ensign Christopher Martinez at navigation, barely 20 years old and already a veteran of a dozen impossible missions. Chief Petty Officer Helen White at communications, who had lost her entire family in the same attack that had taken Harris's. "For Earth," Harris said quietly. "For Earth," his crew echoed. High Arbiter Kethros watched the tiny human vessel with growing unease. His tactical officers had assured him that it posed no threat, that its weapon signatures were so primitive as to be laughable, that it couldn't possibly harm even the smallest ship in his fleet. And yet something about it disturbed him. "Analysis complete, High Arbiter," his science officer reported. "The vessel appears to be constructed from an unknown alloy with unusual spatial properties. Its drive signature doesn't match any known configuration. Recommended course of action: destroy it from range and collect the debris for study." Kethros nodded slowly. It was the logical course of action, and yet he hesitated. In his long career, he had learned to trust his instincts, and his instincts were screaming at him that something was very wrong. "Signal the lead elements to hold position," he ordered. "I want a full tactical analysis before we engage." "High Arbiter, with respect, our sensors show no significant threat capability." The vessel is roughly 100 meters in length, armed with what appear to be chemical projectile weapons and primitive directed energy emitters. Even if it carried nuclear devices, the yield would be insufficient to damage our shields. "I'm aware of what the sensors show," Kethros replied, an edge creeping into his voice. "I'm also aware that those same sensors failed to detect this vessel until it was already in the center of our formation. How did it get here?" The science officer had no answer for that. Aboard the Achilles, Marcus Cole's voice came through the comm again. "Commander, we're at critical mass. The cascade reaction is self-sustaining. We have approximately 90 seconds before it propagates beyond containment." "Understood," Harris said. He looked at the tactical display one final time, watching the vast alien fleet that surrounded them. 400 capital ships, 8,000 support vessels. The largest concentration of Imperium military power in this sector of the galaxy, and they had no idea what was about to happen. "Lieutenant Brooks," Harris said, "send a message to the alien fleet. Open channel all frequencies." Brooks looked at him with surprise, but she complied without question. "Channel open, Commander." Harris stood, straightening his uniform jacket in a gesture that was purely habit. He had thought about what he would say in this moment, had rehearsed a dozen different speeches in his mind. Now that the moment had arrived, he found that none of them felt right. "Attention, vessels of the Galactic Imperium," he said, his voice carrying across the void. "My name is Daniel Harris, commander of the United Earth Defense Vessel Achilles. 3 years ago you came to our world. You killed our families. You burned our cities. You told us that we were nothing, that we were a failed prototype, that we weren't worth the effort of saving." He paused, taking a breath. "You were wrong." High Arbiter Kethros listened to the human's transmission with a mixture of contempt and curiosity. The arrogance was typical of primitive species, the pathetic defiance of creatures who didn't understand their own insignificance. And yet there was something in the human's voice that gave him pause, a certainty, a calm. The voice of someone who knew something that Kethros didn't. "High Arbiter," his tactical officer said, urgency creeping into his tone, "we're detecting an unusual energy buildup from the human vessel. The readings don't match any known weapon signature." "What kind of energy?" "I don't understand the readings, High Arbiter. The sensors are showing a cascade failure in local spacetime. It's as if reality itself is coming apart." Kethros felt his blood turn cold. "All ships, emergency fold. Get us out of here now." But it was too late. The cascade began at the heart of the Achilles, in the containment chamber where Marcus Cole had spent the last 90 seconds saying goodbye to his wife through a recorded message she would never receive. It started as a point of absolute nothing, a hole in the fabric of reality smaller than an atom. And then it grew. The expansion was faster than light, faster than thought, faster than anything the Imperium's technology could track or understand. One moment the Achilles existed, a point of brilliant defiance against the darkness. The next moment it was simply gone, along with everything within 40,000 kilometers of its position. The Imperium fleet, 400 capital ships and 8,000 support vessels, the pride of the Galactic Imperium's military, vanished. Not destroyed, not scattered, not damaged. Just gone. Erased from existence as if they had never been. The cascade wave continued for exactly 3.7 seconds before it collapsed in on itself, leaving behind nothing but empty space and the fading echoes of a transmission that had been interrupted mid-word. In bunkers across Earth, surviving humans watched their sensor feeds in stunned silence. The Imperium fleet was gone. The occupation force, left without support, would soon follow. For the first time in 3 years, humanity could see a future. Dr. Elizabeth Kane sat in her laboratory, staring at the data from the Cascade event. The weapon had worked better than she had dared hope. The affected radius had been at the upper end of her projections, catching the entire enemy fleet in its sphere of annihilation. Humanity was safe. But as she studied the readings, she felt not triumph but terror. The Cascade had worked too well. The energy output had been thousands of times greater than her models predicted. If the containment had failed differently, if the cascade had propagated just a fraction of a second longer, it might have consumed the entire solar system. Or worse, she had built humanity's salvation on a foundation of controlled catastrophe. And now she understood with sickening clarity that control was an illusion. The cascade reaction wasn't just a weapon. It was a doorway to forces that humanity was nowhere near ready to understand. She made herself a promise then, sitting alone in her bunker as the world above her celebrated victory. She would spend the rest of her life studying the cascade phenomenon. She would learn its secrets, its limits, its dangers, and she would make certain that no one ever built another cascade bomb. It was a promise she would not be able to keep. Word of the human victory spread through the galaxy faster than light, carried by quantum communication networks and the terrified transmissions of Imperium observers who had witnessed the event from a safe distance. For the first time in 60 million years, a species that the Imperium had classified as insignificant had struck back, and they had done so with a weapon that made everything the Imperium possessed look primitive by comparison. The response was immediate and absolute. The High Council of the Imperium, 17 beings who had ruled 100,000 worlds for longer than human civilization had existed, convened an emergency session. The topic of discussion was simple: what to do about humanity. "We must destroy them completely," Grand Marshal Vethros argued, his holographic image flickering with barely contained rage. They have demonstrated a capacity for violence beyond anything we have seen in lesser species. If we allow them to survive, they will inevitably turn that violence against us. And how do you propose we do that? High Strategist Selenix countered, her voice cold with contempt. We sent 400 capital ships against them, the largest fleet we have deployed in 10,000 years, and they were annihilated in less than 4 seconds. What force would you suggest we use instead? The entire Imperium Navy if necessary. The entire Navy would meet the same fate. You saw the sensor data. The weapon they used operates on principles we don't understand. Our shields are useless against it. Our fold drives cannot escape it. Our weapons cannot destroy it before it activates. Against this technology, we are as helpless as they were against us. The council fell silent, the weight of Selenix's words settling over them like a shroud. For 60 million years, the Imperium had been the supreme power in the galaxy. They had crushed rebellions, absorbed rival empires, exterminated species that refused to submit. The possibility that they could face a genuine threat had become unthinkable, until now. There is another option, High Arbiter Kethros said quietly. He had survived the battle by a miracle of timing, his personal transport having been outside the cascade radius when it detonated. He had watched his fleet disappear, watched everything he had built in his centuries of service vanish in an instant. And he had spent the days since then reviewing every piece of data they had on humanity, searching for an answer. We could talk to them. The suggestion was met with stunned silence. In the entire history of the Imperium, they had never negotiated with a species they had designated for termination. The very concept was an admission of weakness, a violation of everything the Imperium stood for. "Explain," the High Counselor commanded, his ancient voice carrying the weight of ages. Kethros took a deep breath. "I have studied the humans extensively since our initial contact. Our original assessment was catastrophically wrong, but not in the way we assumed. We classified them as a failed prototype because they demonstrated high aggression and low cooperation. We expected them to destroy themselves. Instead, they built a weapon capable of destroying our fleet," Grand Marshal Vethros interjected bitterly. "Yes, but that's precisely my point. They built that weapon in 3 years, working from a theoretical basis that our own scientists have never explored. They did it while fighting a guerrilla war against our occupation force, while living in underground bunkers, while their civilization lay in ruins around them. Do you understand what that means?" He looked around the council chamber, meeting the eyes of beings who had ruled the galaxy since before his species had evolved. "We didn't just underestimate their aggression. We underestimated their capability. Whatever quirk of evolution produced them, whatever accident of biology or environment made them what they are, it created something we have never encountered before. A species that becomes more dangerous the more desperate it becomes. A species that responds to pressure not by breaking, but by evolving. You're suggesting they pose an existential threat to the Imperium," the High Counselor said slowly. "I'm suggesting that if we continue to treat them as prey, they will eventually develop the capability to treat us the same way. The weapon they use today was built in desperation, with limited resources and incomplete understanding. Imagine what they could build with time and resources. Imagine what they could create if we gave them reason to." "So, what are you proposing?" High Strategist Selenix asked. "That we simply let them go, after they killed millions of our citizens." "I'm proposing that we give them something they value more than revenge, something that will make them see us as partners rather than enemies." "And what could that possibly be?" Kethros smiled grimly. "The truth, the full history of the galaxy, the location of every other species we have conquered, the details of our technology, everything we have kept hidden from lesser races for 60 million years." "That's insane," Grand Marshal Vethros sputtered. "You're talking about giving them the keys to the kingdom." "They've already built a better door," Kethros replied coldly. "The question isn't whether they'll eventually gain access to everything we have. The question is whether they'll do it as our partners or our enemies. And after what we did to their world, I don't think we want to find out what kind of enemies they can be." On Earth, the celebration had lasted for 3 days before giving way to the grim reality of reconstruction. 8 billion people had died in the invasion and its aftermath. Entire continents had been rendered uninhabitable. The infrastructure that had supported human civilization was largely destroyed, but humanity had survived. And that, Dr. Elizabeth Kane reflected as she watched construction drones begin the long process of rebuilding, was something. She was interrupted by an alert on her console. An incoming transmission, tagged with a priority code that made her heart skip a beat. She activated the display. Dr. Kane, the face on the screen, was Admiral Patricia Nolan, looking older than her years. "We've received a communication from the Imperium." Kane felt her blood run cold. "Another ultimatum." "No." Nolan's expression was complicated, a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. "A diplomatic overture. They want to talk." The negotiations took place on a space station in the neutral zone between Sol and the nearest Imperium territory, a facility constructed specifically for the purpose by Imperium engineering drones. The human delegation was small: Admiral Nolan, Dr. Kane, and a security team that was more symbolic than practical. If the Imperium wanted to kill them, no amount of security could prevent it. The Imperium delegation was even smaller: High Arbiter Kethros alone. "You've come a long way for a species we dismissed as irrelevant," Kethros said as they took their seats across the negotiating table. His translator rendered his words into perfect English, with an undertone of bitter humor that Kane suspected was intentional. "We had good motivation," Admiral Nolan replied evenly. "Your people killed 3/4 of our population." "Yes, we did." Kethros made no attempt to apologize or justify. "And you killed 4 million of ours in return. 1 ship, 1 weapon, 90 seconds. By any reasonable calculation, you are now the more dangerous party in this conversation." "Is that why you're here? Because you're afraid of us?" "Partly," Kethros admitted. "But also because I am curious. In 60 million years, we have never encountered a species like yours. Every other civilization we've met, whether we conquered them, absorbed them, or ignored them, has followed predictable patterns. They develop in certain ways, think in certain ways, build in certain ways. And then there is humanity." He leaned forward, his alien features unreadable but his voice intense. "The weapon you used against our fleet operates on principles that contradict our understanding of physics. Our scientists have been studying the residual data since the battle, and they cannot explain how it works. Some of them are convinced it's impossible, that the data must be corrupted. Others have begun to question everything we thought we knew about the universe." "And what do you believe?" Dr. Kane asked quietly. Kethros was silent for a long moment before answering. "I believe that we have made a very dangerous assumption for a very long time. We assumed that because our technology was advanced, our understanding must be complete. We assumed that because we had mastered the principles we knew, there were no principles we didn't know. Your species has proven both assumptions wrong." He reached into his robe and produced a small crystalline device, placing it on the table between them. "This contains the complete scientific and historical archives of the Galactic Imperium, every discovery we have made, every technology we have developed, every species we have encountered over 60 million years. It is the sum total of our civilization's knowledge." Admiral Nolan stared at the device. "Why?" "Because we want something from you in return, something that we cannot take by force." "And what is that?" "Your perspective." Kethros's voice carried an emotion that Kane couldn't quite identify. "We have been looking at the universe through the same lens for longer than your species has existed. You have shown us that our lens is flawed, that there are things we cannot see because we never thought to look for them. We want to learn how to see the way you do." "You want us to teach you?" Dr. Kane asked incredulously. "We want to learn with you. There is a difference." Kethros pushed the crystal across the table. "Take this, study it, build on what we know, and then perhaps we can discover together what neither of us could discover alone." Admiral Nolan didn't touch the crystal. "And if we refuse, if we decide that the best way to protect ourselves is to build more cascade bombs and use them against every Imperium world we can reach, then we will fight, and many of us will die, perhaps all of us on both sides. But I do not think you will choose that path." "Why not?" "Because I have studied your species, Admiral. You are violent, yes. You are dangerous, but you are also curious. You want to understand the universe, not destroy it. You built the Cascade bomb not because you wanted to kill, but because you wanted to survive. Given the choice between war and knowledge, I believe you will choose knowledge." He paused, and for a moment his alien features seemed almost human. "And if I am wrong, if you choose war, then we deserve what comes, because we made you what you are. We taught you that the universe was hostile and cruel. We gave you every reason to believe that survival meant destruction. If you have become monsters, it is because we showed you no other way to be." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for hours. Finally, Admiral Nolan reached across the table and picked up the crystal. "We're not monsters," she said quietly. "We're just human." "Yes," Kethros agreed. "And perhaps that is exactly what the universe needs." The years that followed would later be called the Integration Era, a period of unprecedented change that transformed both human civilization and the Galactic Imperium. The knowledge contained in Kethros's crystal accelerated human technology by centuries, while human perspectives and approaches sparked a scientific renaissance across Imperium space. Dr. Kane spent the rest of her life studying the Cascade phenomenon, eventually developing a theoretical framework that unified Imperium physics with human observations. Her work led to the discovery of what she called deep structure, a fundamental layer of reality that underlaid everything else. It was, she realized, what humans had been glimpsing in their most speculative theories for centuries, the hidden machinery of the universe that the Imperium had never suspected existed. The implications were staggering. With access to deep structure, energy became essentially unlimited. Space and time became malleable. The distances between stars, once measured in years of travel, could be crossed in moments. The universe, which had seemed vast and empty, revealed itself to be interconnected in ways that neither humans nor the Imperium had imagined. But Kane never forgot the lesson of the Cascade bomb. Power, she understood, was not the same as wisdom. The ability to reshape reality did not come with instructions on how to do so responsibly. And the greatest danger humanity faced was not from external enemies, but from itself. "We have been given the keys to the universe," she wrote in her final published paper, completed 3 days before her death at the age of 97. "Now we must decide what kind of universe we want to unlock." High Arbiter Kethros, who had lived far longer than any human and had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations, attended her memorial service. He was the only non-human present, standing at the back of the crowd as speakers eulogized a woman who had changed the course of galactic history. Afterward, he stood alone at her grave, looking up at the stars that had once seemed so distant and were now so close. "We called you a failed prototype," he said quietly. "We thought you were a mistake, an accident, a species that had somehow survived long enough to develop rudimentary technology before destroying yourselves. We were so certain that we understood what you were." He paused, remembering the day his fleet had vanished, the moment when everything he thought he knew had been proven wrong. "We were fools. You weren't a failed prototype. You were a different kind of success, one we were too blind to recognize, and in the end it wasn't your weapons that changed us. It was your ideas, your curiosity, your refusal to accept that anything was impossible." He placed a small crystal on the grave, a companion to the one he had given Admiral Nolan so many years ago. This one contained something different, the complete history of humanity as recorded by Imperium observers from the first stone tools to the Cascade bomb and beyond. It was a gift and an apology and an acknowledgement. "Rest well, Dr. Kane. You have earned it." As he turned to leave, he noticed a young human woman watching him from a distance. She had dark hair and intelligent eyes, and she carried herself with the easy confidence of someone who had grown up in a galaxy where humanity was a respected power rather than a conquered species. "You're Kethros," she said as he approached. "The one who gave us the crystal." "I am. My grandmother used to tell me about you. She said you were the first one who understood what we could become." Kethros considered her words carefully. "I was the first one who understood what we had failed to see. What you could become was always within you. We simply forced you to reveal it." The woman smiled, and in her smile Kethros saw the future of two civilizations intertwined, human curiosity and Imperium wisdom combining to create something greater than either could have achieved alone. "I'm going to the academy next semester," she said. "Deep structure physics. I want to understand how the universe really works. A worthy goal, and when you understand it, then I want to make it better." Kethros laughed, a sound that startled birds from nearby trees and drew curious looks from the departing mourners. It was not a sound that Imperium officials were known for making. "Of course you do," he said. "You're human. You look at the universe and see not what is, but what could be. You see problems as opportunities. You see limits as challenges. You see endings as beginnings." He looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear in the fading light of sunset. "We called you a failed prototype because you didn't fit our definition of success, but perhaps we had the definition wrong. Perhaps success isn't about stability or longevity or power. Perhaps success is about growth, about change, about becoming something more than you were." "And what about you?" the woman asked. "What does the Imperium become?" Kethros smiled, an expression that looked strange on his alien features but felt entirely natural. "That," he said, "is what we're going to find out together." Commander Daniel Harris had known in those final moments aboard the Achilles that he was going to die. He had accepted it, embraced it even, seeing his death as a worthy exchange for the survival of his species. He had pressed the button that initiated the cascade reaction without hesitation or regret. What he had not known, could not have known, was that the cascade bomb did more than destroy matter. It created a momentary tear in the fabric of reality, a window into the deep structure that underlaid existence itself. And in that instant before the wave consumed him, Harris glimpsed something that changed everything. He saw the universe as it truly was, not as light and matter and energy, but as information, as patterns, as relationships between things that had never been things at all. He saw that consciousness was not a product of matter but a fundamental feature of reality, that mind and universe were aspects of the same underlying phenomenon. And he saw that death, as humanity understood it, was an illusion. The cascade wave consumed his body as it consumed everything within its radius. But his consciousness, his pattern, his essential self, did not disappear. It merged with the deep structure, became part of the underlying reality that the cascade had briefly revealed. He was still there, still aware, still Daniel Harris. But he was also something more, something vast, something that could perceive the universe in ways no biological being ever could. For a long time, he simply observed. He watched humanity and the Imperium navigate their awkward peace. He watched Dr. Kane develop her theories about deep structure, coming tantalizingly close to understanding what he had become. He watched new generations grow up in a galaxy transformed by the sacrifice he and his crew had made. And eventually, he began to act. Small things at first. A researcher stumbling across an insight that led to a breakthrough. A politician making a decision that prevented a war. A child asking a question that no one had thought to ask before. Subtle nudges that steered events toward outcomes that Harris thought were best. He wasn't a god. He didn't control events or determine outcomes. He simply made certain possibilities slightly more likely than others. And he did it with the same care and caution that had characterized his command of the Achilles, always weighing costs against benefits, always considering unintended consequences. He was not alone, he eventually realized. Others who had died in cascade events had undergone the same transformation. His crew was there, scattered through the deep structure but still connected to each other by bonds that transcended physical reality. Lieutenant Brooks, Ensign Martinez, Chief White, Marcus Cole, all of them had become something beyond human, beyond alien, beyond anything the galaxy had ever known. They called themselves the Guardians, though no one in the physical universe would ever know they existed. Their purpose was simple: to nurture the growth of consciousness in all its forms, to protect the potential that existed in every sentient mind, to guide the universe toward the best version of itself. It was, Harris reflected, not a bad way to spend eternity. 1,000 years after the Battle of Saul, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The Galactic Imperium was no more, replaced by a loose confederation of species that traded ideas as eagerly as they had once traded goods. Deep structure technology had made scarcity obsolete, eliminating the economic pressures that had driven conflict for billions of years. Humans were everywhere, their curiosity and adaptability having carried them to the farthest reaches of explored space. They had interbred with other species, created artificial intelligences that were considered full citizens, modified themselves in ways that made the distinction between human and alien increasingly meaningless. But they were still recognizably human, still driven by the same restless desire to explore, to understand, to grow. Still capable of great cruelty and great kindness, often in the same breath, still fundamentally, gloriously, imperfectly themselves. In a memorial garden on Earth, a statue stood. It depicted a small ship, barely larger than a yacht, surrounded by the ghostly outlines of hundreds of larger vessels. The inscription beneath it was simple: the Achilles and her crew. They showed us what we could become. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see it, beings of 1,000 species who wanted to pay their respects to the humans who had changed everything. They left offerings and prayers and questions, speaking to the statue as if it could hear them. And somewhere in the deep structure of reality, Daniel Harris listened to every word. "Not bad for a failed prototype," Catherine Brooks said beside him, her voice a whisper in the fabric of existence. Harris smiled, a gesture that manifested as a brief shimmer in the air above the memorial garden. Not bad at all. Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, indifferent to the dramas that played out among them. But the stars, too, were part of the deep structure, part of the vast tapestry of existence that the Guardians helped to weave. And in that tapestry, humanity's thread had become essential, a strand of chaos and creativity that added texture and meaning to the whole. The Galactic Imperium had dismissed Earth's failed prototype as irrelevant. They had been wrong. They had been so very, very wrong. The end.